أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على خير المرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم سبحانك اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. So welcome back. We're now on class 19. We've been going through elements relating to the prayer, rulings relating to the prayer. We're in a very long chapter that deals with a variety of different things relating to prayer. And we're coming right to the end of it. And the final thing that he's talking about here is nosebleeds. What happens if you get a nosebleed while you're praying? So he says here, وَمَنْ رَأَفَ مَعَ الْإِمَامِ. If somebody gets a nosebleed and he's praying in jama'ah behind an imam, خَرَجَ فَغَسَلَ الدَّمِ ثُمَّ بَنَى مَا لَمْ يَتَكَلَّمْ. So the first thing he does, he leaves the prayer while remaining in the prayer. This is the thing he's talking about here. You're leaving the prayer while remaining in the prayer. So you're going away to clean yourself, to clean off the blood, but you're not actually saying Assalamu alaikum or exiting the prayer. You're still considered to be praying your prayer. This is a very unusual set of circumstances. This is specific to blood. Blood is considered to be different to other types of impurity. It's less severe than other types of impurity. Basically, most impurities, urine or feces or anything like that, if a tiny speck of it gets on you, it's impure. If you know for certain that it's there. Obviously, this is not in the case of doubt, where you've cleaned yourself and then, you just suddenly have a doubt that the wetness might be urine. That's different.
Yeah. Right.
But blood, in order for it to be considered that you are carrying impurity, it has to be more than a certain amount on you. So this is where this particular ruling comes in, that you can go off and clean it. But you don't have to go anywhere if the amount of blood is a small amount. And so a small amount is when you get, your nose starts to bleed, but it doesn't really come out of the nose. There's just blood in the nose.
Right.
You
so, can tell the nose is
you can tell there's a bit of blood in there, but it's not dripping out. There's just blood in the nose. So you sort of use your fingers of your left hand to wipe it off. So you do each one to wipe away the blood. And once you reach the end of it, and some people say you also use the right hand, once you've reached all of your fingers and they're all covered in blood, then that means you should go away and clean it.
Okay.
But if by the time you've reached the final few fingers, there's no more blood coming on your finger,
then you could carry on.
Then you just carry on, because that's not considered to be enough. That amount of blood is not considered at all. If you then, once you've done those top ones, go to the middle ones and start wiping those blood, if that blood on the middle parts of your finger, these middle bits, exceeds what's called a dirham baghli, which is a sort of according to two positions. One is it was a slightly larger dirham that did the rounds in the early times. Another one is it's part of the body of a camel, a baghl, which is on the inside of its leg, that there's a sort of round thing there that's similar sort of size. Even if in area, not sort of like in volume, if the sort of flat area of it is bigger than that, the blood on you, then you are carrying impurities. You need to go and wash it.
Right.
So when you go out of
so now he's going to go into that. How does this work?
Okay.
So he says here, so you go out and you wash off the blood. So you go to the nearest place that you can find to wash, even if that means leaving the mosque, because you are leaving the mosque, because really the mosque is the place where you pray. So when you go outside to the wudu area, in a sense, you've left the mosque. You go there, you wash off the blood. You only do this, by the way, if you start bleeding and once the nosebleed sets in, basically that's you for the next 20 minutes. Then you wouldn't bother, because you just leave the prayer.
Yeah.
Or you would continue in the prayer if the time was going to run out, because you're going to have to pray with blood anyway.
Yeah.
So that's another consideration. But this is only when it's sort of like coming out quite a lot, but it's going to stop. So you go and wash it off. They call it when it drips out, drip, 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 or it sort of like flows out slowly, not when it sort of like gushes out like a stream.
Yeah.
Because obviously there's another thing in them here. When you're in the mosque, you have to make sure you don't dirty the floor of the mosque, the carpet. Obviously, in the past, it wasn't such an issue because it was a dirt flooring. So there's that famous hadith of the Arabi, the desert Arab who came in and peed in the mosque, and the Messenger of Allah ﷺ just went and had them clean it off with water and then threw over, so it was easy to clean.
Yeah. Nowadays different, isn't it?
Now, if you drip, you could ruin the carpet of the mosque.
Yeah.
So basically, if that's happening and you have to finish your prayer, you can't leave. You have to make sure you put something down on the ground to soak up the blood before it touches the carpet. So he says here, thumma bana. So you go, you wash off the blood, then you come back and you build. What does he mean by that? He means that if you prayed one rakat with the imam and you completed that rakat completely, so that means you stood up for the second rakat, then your nosebleed started sometime in that second rakat before the tashahhud, before you sat for the tashahhud. Any time in that second rakat, you would leave. You wouldn't count that second rakat at all because you hadn't completed it. You would wash off your blood, you'd come back. Maybe the imam would now be in his final rakat. You join him. If you catch that final rakat, that will be your second, and then you have to do two more. That's what it means. So you've got one, you miss two with the imam, and then you catch the last one with the imam, and then you complete it afterwards.
So the ruling of meeting the takbir or the ruku doesn't suffice in this situation.
Well, it does if you catch the final rakat before ruku, then you've caught the final rakat. But I'm talking about the rakat that you're in. If you leave a rakat before you fully completed it, that rakat doesn't count. He says here, so you can only do this with a certain conditions in place. Firstly, ma la lam yatakallam. You do not speak. You do not stop and have a chat with somebody as you're doing it. You might see a friend, you know, on the way out while you're going to the place to wash. Hey, hi, how are you doing? No, none of that.
So you're still in that state.
You're still in the state of prayer. Secondly, he doesn't mention here, you should, if it's possible, maintain facing the Qibla, if you can. Unless that's going to, you know, unless the mosque's so full, if you do that, you're going to be stumbling into people who are praying. In which case then, out of necessity, you can put your back to the Qibla. But generally speaking, if you can, try and maintain facing the Qibla. Thirdly, you should not walk over any impurity. So if you have to cross a street and you know that that street has lots of camel droppings are fine. Horse droppings, for example. Even if it's dry, you shouldn't stand on it. Make sure you avoid them. Or if you're going into a toilet in order to wash yourself, then don't walk over where people will be urinating or anything like that. Because that will basically then, you'll be in your prayer and there will be impurity on the place in which you're praying, in a sense. So he says here, this is what he just said, وَلَا يَبْنِي عَلَى رَكْعَةٍ لَمْ تَتَتَمَّ بِسَجْدَتَيْهَا. You do not build on any rak'at that you have not completed with both its sajdas. So what does this mean? If you've completed both the sajdas and you've fully stood, or you've left the final sajda and you're basically to go into the next position and you've completely left the sajda, that rak'at is complete. So this means that if you're in the middle and you do the second one and you sit to do the tashahhud, by sitting to do the tashahhud, you've completed the second rakat, even though you haven't got into the third one yet. Yep. Well, yalghiha. So if you basically only did half a rakat, you did 1.5 rakats, you cancel out that half rakat. And you don't say, I've got 2.5 rakats left. You don't come back to the same position you were in that second rakat. You just get rid of that second rakat.
You have a
completely.
rakat.
You have a fresh rakat. Yeah. And if you join and the imam's halfway through a rakat, you don't count that rakat either. If he's past the ruku, you only count the rakats that you complete with the imam.
Yeah.
وَلَا يَنْصَرِفْ لِدَمٍ خَفِيفٍ. You do not leave the prayer if you've only got a small amount of blood coming out of your nose, like I said. وَلْيَفْتِلْهُ بِأَصَابِعِهِ. And you should use your fingers to wipe it off to see how much it is. إِلَّا أَنْ يَسِيلَ أَوْ يَقْطُرَ. Except if it's actually dripping from your nose, in which case you know it's not even worth bothering to do that. You go immediately. So these are the various different. There's also the condition, by the way, that if you get to the place, I'm not sure if he's going to mention this. If you get to, I think he mentions this here actually. Let me see. No, if you get to the place where you're washing your nose, and basically you've already done 3 rakats with the imam, and you know by the time you get back the imam's going to have finished, then you complete your prayer there, or the nearest clean place to where you washed your nose.
Just carry on.
Carry on.
Yeah, so you wash your nose, then you go somewhere wherever is clean in that place, or just at the back of the mosque maybe, or if it's you had to go home to wash your nose, then you do it at home and you complete your prayer there.
Are you completing it, carrying on from where the imam left off?
No, you complete it from where you left the
You
prayer, and you build on where you finished the prayer.
There's no distance.
No, you have to try and get to the closest place. So you can't go past one place where you can wash because the other one's nicer. No, you go to the nearest one where you can do what you need to do in order to wash your nose. وَلَا يَبْنِي فِي قَيْءٍ وَلَا حَدَثٍ. So here I just said you do it when impurity comes out that you can wash off, and it refers to blood. But what's, for example, if you vomit, which is also impure, can you build? Vomit that's changed, not when you just eat something and it just stays there and hasn't been digested yet. That's not impure. That's just sort of like something that's remaining in your throat. This is vomit that's gone into your stomach, changed, and then you've regurgitated it. That's impure. So he says here, if you vomit, he says here, if you do that deliberately in your prayer, it breaks your prayer anyway, but can you build on vomit? He says no. And he said, what about if you pass wind in the prayer? Can you just go and do wudu and come back? No. He says here it's only specific to blood.
Right.
Nothing else. وَمَنْ رَأَفَ بَعْدَ سَلَامِ الْإِمَامِ سَلَّمْ وَانْصَرَفْ. What happens, he says here, if your nosebleed starts while you're still in your prayer, but after the imam has said Assalamu alaikum? Do you have to go and clean it before completing your prayer because you've got impurity on you? He said, no, it's a really small thing. It takes you literally a second. It's less kerfuffle to just say Assalamu alaikum and be done than to go all the way back and do it. So he says here, if the imam has said his salam, but your nosebleed starts, then you'd say Assalamu alaikum and leave. وَإِنْ رَأَفَ قَبْلَ سَلَامِهِ. But if the imam hasn't said Assalamu alaikum, he sat down to do his tashahhud, and then your nosebleed starts. He said, in that case, you go and wash it. You don't know how long it's going to take to do his tashahhud. And you're carrying impurity now in the prayer deliberately because it's more than, as I said, it's above the size that counts as impurity, carrying impurity. So then you leave, you wash it, and then you complete your prayer where you get to.
So you come back, you do the tashahhud, and you do the taslim.
But you come back, you sit down, you do the tashahhud, and then you say the salam. You don't have to come and do the whole rakat because you've completed the rakat basically as soon as you sat, because it's with the 2 sajdas. ثم رجع فيجلس أو فجلس وسلم. Then you sit down and do your salam alaikum. وللراعف, and he talks about the other thing. وللراعف أن يبني في منزله إذا يئس أن يدرك بقية الصلاة الإمام. A person who has a nosebleed is permitted to build on his prayer in his manzil. Now, some people translate this as home, manzil, but here it doesn't mean home. It means the place where he went to wash his nose. And obviously, if that place is a toilet area, because sometimes they have toilets linked, then you wouldn't pray in that place, just nearby that place. But you have the right, if you know or suspect that you're not going to be able to catch the rest of the imam's prayer, to complete your prayer and build on your prayer there and complete it there. That's what he says here. Illa fil Jumu'ah, except in one prayer. So let's say you're praying Salatul Jumu'ah behind the imam, and then you get a nosebleed, and then you leave, and it takes you a while to wash your nose, and then you realize the imam, you might have heard him even, has said Assalamu alaikum by the time you finished. What do? What is one of the conditions of Jumu'ah in the Maliki madhab?
You pray like
it has to be in the mosque.
Has to be in the mosque.
Yes, so you cannot complete your Jumu'ah prayer outside of the mosque. You have to come back into the mosque and complete it there, even if the imam has already finished the prayer. This is specific to Jumu'ah.
So when you come back inside the mosque, you were in the mosque and then you left, you come back in, you carry on 4 rakats or 2 rakats?
No, 2 rakats, because you so long as you caught a rakat with the imam.
Okay.
If you didn't, if you had to leave in the first rakat,
Yeah.
then you haven't got any
Yeah.
prayer with the imam.
Okay. So you have to.
So you have to do 4 for dhuhr. And basically you haven't caught the prayer at all. If he's finished, then you just start again because you haven't caught it.
Okay.
You only, and usually this building is if you actually catch something with the imam. If you haven't caught anything with the imam, what's the point of building on that prayer?
Yeah. It's nothing there.
This is only when you actually fully caught a rakat that you bother with this.
Right.
If you have to leave in the first rakat, then you wouldn't do this.
Yeah.
Because there's no point in building because you might as well just go and then rejoin wherever the imam is.
Yeah.
He says here, إِلَّا فِي الْجُمْعَةِ فَلَا يَبْنِي إِلَّا فِي الْجَامِعِ. Except for Jumu'ah, you can only build on your prayer in the Jamia, in the mosque. وَيَغْسِلُ قَلِيلَ الدَّمِ مِنَ الثَّوْبِ. If you've got blood, whether it's from a nosebleed or from a wound or however else it's come onto you, maybe you've been working in a butcher's and you've got blood on your garments, your clothes you're wearing. He says here, you can wash it off your garment if it's only a small amount, just with water, just to remove it. And this is also in the case where you've left for the nosebleed. If some of the blood has come onto your garment, then you can wash off that little bit of blood off your garment very easily. وَلَا تُعَادُ الصَّلَاةِ إِلَّا مِنْ كَثِيرَةٍ. So if you've got a bit of blood on your garment, you can go and wash it off, and then your prayer is valid basically. He says if you have a small amount of blood on you, your prayer is valid anyway, because that's not enough to invalidate the prayer. He says if you have a lot of blood, that's when you repeat the prayer. But only if you only have to repeat it if you deliberately leave it on there, knowing it's there. And if you were to leave, you would still have time to do the prayer in its time after washing it off or removing it. But if you forget it's there, you notice it and then forget, or you're unaware it's there, then it's only recommended to repeat in the prayer. In other words, your prayer is valid, even if you've got a lot of blood, even if you're covered from head to toe in blood and you completely forget about it.
Even if this blood is from something else, maybe like
even from something else. He says here, وقليل كل نجاسة وقليل كل نجاسة غيره وكثيرها سواء. Every other type of impurity, it doesn't matter whether it's little or a lot, the ruling is the same. As I said, urine, a drop of urine is the same as a pint of urine. A tiny bit of poo is the same as a load of poo. It's all the same.
Yeah.
ودم البراغيث ليس عليه غسله إلا أن يتفاحش. As for blood from fleas or mosquitoes or bed bugs or any of these types of creatures that you slap on your to kill, and it leaves a mark on your garment when you kill it, or you scratch and the blood, you can see a bit of blood of it on your face or whatever it is. He says here, that's overlooked. Even if it's a lot, it's overlooked, unless it's so much that you're ashamed to be in front of people in that state with all these little drops of blood on you, basically. If that is the case, then it is recommended for you to remove it, to wash it off. But still, it doesn't invalidate. That's not considered to be like your blood. The blood of a mosquitoes, even if it leaves quite a lot of blood, even if it looks like it's more than that amount that we talked about, if it's like from mosquitoes and fleas and bed bugs and all these types of things, lice, it doesn't really count. But you should still wash it if you are going to be so ashamed to have all this blood on you like that, basically. Yatafahash. Right, so are there any questions on that section to do with blood?
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Islam.
I actually used to work as a butcher. I thought the blood in the meat, as long as it had been zabiha slaughtered, it's tahar, isn't it?
Yeah, that sort of blood. But I'm talking about if you sacrifice an animal, and that blood that comes out, gushes out, gets on your clothes, that's impure. As for the blood that resides within the meat itself after it's been hung, especially that blood, like you have a bloody steak, that's tahir. That's fine. That's not considered the same at all.
Okay, I didn't know they were both called butchers. I'm learning something. Thank you.
Well, when that's you butcher something when you slaughter it. I was thinking maybe I should have said slaughter.
I honestly have no idea. Alhamdulillah.
And you probably know the word better than I do.
I don't. Thank you.
Anyway, moving on. We're talking in the next section is about the sajdas of the Quran. Now, according to Imam Malik, there are no sajdas in the Mufassal. The Mufassal is the final section of the Quran which incorporates the short surahs of the Quran, which is called Mufassal because it has lots of fassals, it has lots of gaps because there's so many surahs, so it has Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim very frequently. This was the section that people who divide the Quran into a week would recite in their seventh day. And it begins with Surah Al-Hujurat, which is about the final 4.5 juz of the Quran, or a little bit less than that. In that, there are 3 places you'll find in your Mus'haf where it says you should do a sajda. There is Surah Al-Najm, the star. There's a sajda at the end of that in the Mus'haf. Then there's Surah Al-Inshiqaq, which is in the second to last hizb, which there is also a sajda in the Mus'haf towards the end of that surah. And then right at the end of Iqra, Surah Al-Qalam, there's also a sajda. Those ones we do not do sajdas for in the madhab of Malik.
When you read it.
Yeah.
At any time at all.
No, never. Not in any situation. There's also another sajda you'll find in the Mus'haf that we don't do in the position of Malik, and that's the second one in Surah Al-Hajj, where he says, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu ruk'u wasjudu wa'budu rabbakum waf'alul khayra la'allakum tuflihun, there, where it commands us to do ruku and to do sajda in that particular thing, that place right at the end of Hajj. You'll find in many Mus'hafs it has a sajda there. We do not have that sajda in the madhab of Malik. In fact, you'll find that pretty much all of there are other places in the Quran where it says, gives you the command wasjud, directly, a command, insha, do sajda, prostrate. And you'll find that in none of those places is there a sajda. The sajda is always when there's khabar, when it's describing the action of people doing something. So that's another rule. That's why in certain cases, there's one here where there's a difference of opinion about where it has a command, wasjudu. And that for that reason, my teacher, Tajweed, said that the sajda is not in that ayat, but it's in the ayat that come after it. And we'll come to that when we come to it, inshallah.
So like in the end of Surah Al-Iqra,
yeah,
that it gives command like
wasjud waqtarib, yes. That's a command. Wasjud, do sajda, waqtarib, and get close. But that's not somewhere where we do a sajda generally, because it's in the Mufassal. And as I said, generally speaking, when there's a direct command and it's not a description of people of Allah what they should do, there's also not a sajda generally. وَسُجُودُ الْقُرْآنِ إِحْدَى عَشَرَ سَجْدَةً. There are 11 sajdas of the Quran. وَهِيَ الْعَزَائِمِ. And these are the places we are commanded to do sajda. لَيْسَ فِي الْمُفَصَّلِ مِنْهَا شَيْءٍ. There are none of them in the Mufassal, which is the final bit I talked about. These 11 are, he goes, fi alif lam mim sad. The first one here, Surah Al-A'raf, you'll find that he has different names for some of these surahs. This first place is in alif lam mim sad, which is the way Surah Al-A'raf begins, which is the 7th surah of the Quran. This is the first of the sajdas of the Quran. I think it's the only one we've done in the Tarawih so far. In the qawlihi, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَيُسَبِّحُونَ لَهُ وَيَسْجُدُونَ. And this is إِنَّ الَّذِينَ عِنْدَ رَبِّكَ لَا يَسْتَكْبِرُونَ عَنْ عِبَادَتِهِ وَيُسَبِّحُونَهُ وَلَهُ يَسْجُدُونَ. Those who are in the presence of your Lord do not consider themselves too great to worship him. they glorify his praise and they prostrate to him. As soon as you finish that last bit, وَلَهُ يَسْجُدُونَ, which is the actual end of the surah, the final part of the surah, you do a sajda. Basically, this sajda is emphasized most when you are praying. That's the place where it's emphasized the most, whether you're reciting silently or out loud. But also any other time you are reciting for the purpose of dhikr of Allah, of worship, then when you come across a sajda, you read a sajda, you do the sajda, and anybody who's listening to you with the purpose of benefiting from your recitation does the sajda, so long as you're in wudu and all of the other things that are necessary for praying are met. Your aura is covered and you haven't got impurity on you and so on. And also when you are studying Quran and learning Quran, if you are in wudu when you're doing that, then the first time you recite these ayats, when you're memorizing them, for example, you do a sajda. And then if you're repeating it again and again and again, you don't repeat the sajda. So he says, yeah, of course. So he says, it is the end of surah, وَهُوَ آخِرُهَا, it is the end of surah Alif Lam Mim Sad. فَمَا كَانَ فِي صَلَاةٍ فَإِذَا سَجَدَهَا قَامَ وَقَرَأَ مِنَ الْأَنْفَالِ. If you are praying, when you come across this recitation, he said you do the sajda for it, then you stand up again after doing the sajda and recite the beginning of Surah Al-Anfal. You don't just simply recite it, go into a sajda, then come up and then go straight into ruku'. The reason is to avoid confusion.
Right.
So basically, people, it makes sense if you're in the prayer and you're leading the prayer to tell people that there's going to be a sajda, because they may just think that you've forgotten the ruku' and you've just gone into a sajda. So in order to avoid that, usually speaking, the way you do a sajda is you do the sajda, then you get up and you recite a little bit more, and then you finish the rakat. أو من غيرها, or if you're reciting any of the other things, he says, or even if you're here reciting Surah Al-A'raf, you can recite the next part, which is Anfal, or you can recite from elsewhere in the Quran, so long as you do a little bit of extra recitation after completing the sajda. ما تيسر عليه, whatever's easy for him. In other words, something small, maybe only an ayat, just so you get some recitation after the sajda. ثم ركع وسجد. Then you do your rest of your rakat. You do your ruku and your sajda. وفي الرعد, the second one is in Surah Al-Ra'd, which I think is the 12th or 13th surah of the Quran. عند قوله وظلالهم بالغدو والآصال, or the full ayat, وَلِلَّهِ يَسْجُدُ مَنْ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَرَضِ ثَوْعًا وَكَرْحًا وَظِلَالُهُم بِالْغُدُوِّ وَالْآصَالِ. Everyone in heaven and earth prostrates to Allah willingly or unwillingly, as do their shadows in the morning and the evening. That's in Surah Al-Ra'd, meaning thunder. A'raf, usually translated as ramparts. A'raf is the place where people can see both the garden and the fire, like a bit like purgatory in a sense, where they can see both. They haven't quite done enough to go into either. It's mentioned in Surah Al-A'raf, all of the ayats. وفي النحل, then in the 16th surah of the Quran, Nahl, bees, يخافون ربهم من فوقهم ويفعلون ما يؤمرون. And the full ayah, وَلِلَّهِ يَسْجُدُ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ مِنْ دَابَّةٍ وَالْمَلَائِكَةُ وَهُمْ لَا يَسْتَكْبِرُونَ يَخَافُونَ رَبَّهُم مِّن فَوْقِهِمْ وَيَفْعَلُونَ مَا يُؤْمَرُونَ. Everything in the heavens and every creature on the earth prostrates to Allah, as do the angels. They are not puffed up with pride. They fear their Lord above them and do everything they are commanded to do. Then he says, وَفِي بَنِي إِسْرَائِيل. Bani Israel is another name for Surah Al-Isra. Surah Al-Isra, the night journey, called Banu Israel because it talks about the Banu Israel quite extensively in the beginning. He says, وَيَخِرُّونَ لِلْأَذْقَانِ يَبْكُونَ وَيَزِيدُهُمْ خُشُوعًا. So this is in the ayat where it says, they fall to the ground in prostration, and it increases them in humility. In Surah Al-Isra. Then he says here in Surah Maryam, وَإِذَا تُتْلَى عَلَيْهِمُ آيَاتُ الرَّحْمَنِ خَرُّوا سُجَّدًا وَبُكِيًّا. When the signs of the Rahman were recited to them, they fell on their faces, weeping in prostration. So you see, they're all talking about what people are doing, all of these ayahs so far.
Yeah.
وَفِي الْحَجِّ, and this is the first one in Hajj, for those who see the Mus'hafs, not the second one, which we don't take. He says here, أَوَّلُهَا وَمَنْ يُهِنِ, he says the first of the two. وَمَنْ يُهِنِ اللَّهُ فَمَا لَهُ مِنْ مُكْرِمٍ إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَفْعَلُ مَا يَشَاءُ. And that's a wider part. أَلَمْ تَرَ أَنَّ اللَّهَ يَسْجُدُ لَهُ مَنْ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَنْ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَالشَّمْسُ وَالْقَمَرُ وَالنُّجُومُ وَالْجِبَالُ وَالشَّجَرُ وَالدَّوَابُ وَكَثِيرٌ مِنَ النَّاسِ وَكَثِيرٌ حَقَّ عَلَيْهِ الْعَذَابُ وَمَنْ يُهِنِ اللَّهُ فَمَا لَهُ مِنْ مُكْرِمٍ إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَفْعَلُ مَا يَشَاءُ. Do you not see that everyone in the heavens and everyone on the earth prostrates to Allah, and the sun and the moon and the stars and the mountains and the trees and the earth prostrate to Allah, and many of mankind, but many of them inevitably merit punishment. Those Allah humiliates. Those people Allah humiliates will have no one to honor them. Allah does whatever He wills. Very strong.
That's a powerful verse.
Yeah. Then in Surah Al-Furqan, which is the surah after Nur, أَنَشْجُدُ لِمَا تَامُرُنَا وَزَادُهُمْ نُفُورًا. And that's وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمُ اسْجُدُوا لِلرَّحْمَنِ قَالُوا وَمَا الرَّحْمَنُ أَنَسْجُدُ لِمَا تَامُرُنَا وَزَادَهُمْ نُفُورًا. When they are told to prostrate to the Rahman, they say, and what is the Rahman? Are we to prostrate to something you command us to? And it merely makes them run away all the more. That's in Surah Al-Furqan, ayat 60. Then he says, وَفِي الْهُدْهُدْ. Surah Al-Hudhud is another name for Surah Al-Naml, the ant. Again, the story of the Hudhud is mentioned in the same surah. Allahu la ilaha illa hu Rabbul Arshil Kareem, Rabbul Arshil Azim. And that's part of a larger segment. It says, وَزَيَّنَ لَهُمُ الشَّيْطَانُ أَعْمَالَهُمْ فَصَدَّهُمْ عَنِ السَّبِيلِ فَهُمْ لَا يَهْتَدُونَ أَنْ لَا يَسْجُدُوا لِلَّهِ الَّذِي يُخْرِجُ الْخَبْءَ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَيَعْلَمُ مَا تُخْفُونَ وَمَا تُعْلِنُونَ اللَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا هُوَ رَبُّ الْعَرْشِ الْعَظِيمِ. Shaitan has made their actions appear good to them and debarred them, blocked them from the way, so they are not guided and do not prostrate to Allah. Who brings out what is hidden in the heavens and the earth and knows what you conceal and what you divulge? Allah. There is no God but Him, the Lord of the mighty throne. And then he says, وَفِي أَلِفْ لَامْ تَنْزِيل. He says there's another name for sajda, Surah Sajda. So called because it has a sajda in it, Surah Sajda. Prostration. وَسَبَّحُوا بِحَمْدِ رَبِّهِمْ وَهُمْ لَا يَسْتَكْبِرُونَ. And that's إِنَّمَا يُؤْمِنُ بِآيَاتِنَا الَّذِينَ إِذَا ذُكِرُوا بِهَا خَرُّوا سُجَّدًا وَسَبَّحُوا بِحَمْدِ رَبِّهِمْ وَهُمْ لَا يَسْتَكْبِرُونَ. The people who truly do have iman in our signs are those who fall to the ground in prostration when they are reminded of them and glorify the praise of their Lord and are not arrogant. And then he says, وَفِي صَاد, Surah Sad, فَاسْتَغْفَرَ رَبَّهُ وَخَرَّ رَاكِعًا وَأَنَابَ وَقِيلَ عِنْدَ قَوْلِهِ لَزُلْفَى وَحُسْنَ مَآبٍ. He says here, in Surah Sad, there's a difference of opinion about which ayat has the sajda. He says here, the first position, it is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَاسْتَغْفَرَ رَبَّهُ وَخَرَّ رَاكِعًا وَأَنَابَ. He begged forgiveness from his Lord, Dawood alayhi salam. He begged forgiveness from his Lord and fell down, prone, prostrating, and repented. At the end of that, one group say the sajda falls there. Then the next ayat, which says, فَغَفَرْنَا لَهُ ذَلِكَ وَإِنَّ لَهُ عِنْدَنَا لَزُلْفَى وَحُسْنَ مَآبٍ. We forgave him for that, and he has nearness to us and a good homecoming. They say, no, you don't do the sajda after the first bit, you do it after this next ayat. So there's a difference of opinion. There's two places where there's a difference of opinion, in fact. The next one is the final one we're mentioning, the 11th one, which is Surah Fussilat. He says, وَفِي حَامِيم تَنْزِيل, which is Fussilat. He says, وَاسْجُدُوا لِلَّهِ الَّذِي خَلَقَهُنَّ إِن كُنْتُمُ إِيَّاهُ تَعْبُدُونَ. You say it when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ اللَّيْلُ وَالنَّهَارُ وَالشَّمْسُ وَالْقَمَرُ. لا تسجدوا للشمس ولا للقمر واسجدوا لله الذي خلقهن إن كنتم إياه تعبدون. Among his signs are the night and the day and the sun and the moon. Do not prostrate to the sun nor to the moon. Prostrate to Allah who created them if you worship him. So some people say that is the point where you do the sajda. But as I said, my teacher said no, because that's one of the times where it says wasjud. It's a command. So according to him, it's on after the next ayat, which is فَإِنِ اسْتَكْبَرُوا فَالَّذِينَ عِنْدَ رَبِّكَ يُسَبِّحُونَ لَهُ بِاللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ وَهُمْ لَا يَسْأَمُونَ. The next ayat after that, if they grow arrogant, those who are with your Lord glorify him night and day and never grow tired. So in some of the mushafs, you'll see the sajda after that first ayat. In other ones, you'll see it after this ayat.
Same most of the mushaf I use is on the first ayah.
Yeah.
The,
Yes.
the Ruk'ah.
As I said, the mu'tamad of the madhab is the first one, even though it has wasjudu, because that's I suppose the one that most people followed. But my teacher, who was very, very teacher, Sheikh Abdul Hamid Zwaitan, he taught tajweed in the Qayrawan. He said that the position that it is the second one is stronger. But Allah knows best. And also, as I said, that's why if you take that position, not wasjudu, is why there's no second one in Surah Al-Hajj. وَلَا يَسْجُدُ السَّجْدَةَ فِي التَّلَاوَةِ إِلَّا عَلَى وُضُوءٍ. If you are reciting one of these ayats, but the best thing to do if you are not in a position to do the sajda, and it's feasible for you, is to try and leave out the ayat of sajda if you're reciting through the book of Allah. And you know you're not in wudu when you're reciting, or you're reciting for the purpose of ibadah and you come one of those ayats, then you leave it out. Or you don't want to confuse people if you're leading them, so you make sure you stop before you reach that ayah if you're leading people in the prayer. That's the most effective thing to do if you don't want to recite the ayat of sajda. But if you do recite it, then you only do the sajda if you are in wudu. If you are not in wudu, you don't then go and do wudu and make up the sajda.
So I've seen someone doing tilawah beside me.
Mhm.
So what he did was he skipped the ayah of sajda.
Yeah.
So when later he finished the recitation, I asked him why did he skip the ayah.
Yeah.
He now said he recited it silently because he did not want, because the ruling is that if I hear someone reciting the ayah of sajda, I'd have to do the sajda. So
Only but the person who's reciting it usually has to do it as well, generally. So if the person who's reciting it is not in wudu and you hear it, if the person who's not reciting it doesn't do it, it doesn't necessarily become incumbent upon you to recite it. Also, if he should, even if you recite it silently, you should still do the sajda of recitation generally.
So am I allowed to skip the ayah?
Yes, of course, yes. If you're not in a position, maybe you're reciting just before Maghrib, as you're going to mention in a minute, and you know you're not going to be able to do the sajda, but out of respect for the ayat, you don't want to recite it without doing a sajda, or you're not in wudu, then yes, skip it. It's fine. And then come back to it later when you are in a position where you want to, if you want to still want to recite it, say you're reciting through the whole Quran.
So when I come back to it later, am I reciting just the ayah, or I'll just recite that part?
Well, it depends. If you're in a position, you recite leading up to it the meaning. But I mean, there's no obligation to recite the ayats of sajda. But if you recite them, you should do the sajda, especially if you're praying. So you do not do this sajda when you're reciting, except when you are in wudu. How do you do it? He says, وَيُكَبِّرُ لَهَا. So when you finish reciting the ayat, you do the takbir, Allahu Akbar, and go down into your sajda, do whatever du'as or dhikrs you're doing in that sajda, and then you come out of the sajda. And when you come out of the sajda, there's two positions. One that you have a choice, you can say Allahu Akbar or not, which is the weaker position. The stronger position is that it is recommended then, but not far, well, not to the same level of saying it to enter, but to leave it, it is better to say the sajda, to say Allahu Akbar. So you say Allahu Akbar twice, to go in and to come out. That's the best position. Then when you sit up, you don't say Assalamu alaikum. Just Allahu Akbar, sajda, Allahu Akbar, come out of sajda.
And we don't start.
then you resume your recitation. Say if you're doing the daily hizb, and then you recite that particular ayat of sajda, everybody then goes into the sajda, presuming they're in wudu. Then they say Allahu Akbar, go into it, Allahu Akbar, come out. Then they pick up their mushafs and resume reciting without further ado. They don't have to sort of do a salamu alaikum or anything like that. وَلَا يُسَلِّمُ مِنْهَا وَفِي التَّكْبِيرِ فِي الرَّفْعِ مِنْهَا سَاعَةً. So you don't say assalamu alaikum when you finish it. And as to the takbir, when coming out of it, there is lassitude, you can do it or not. وَإِن كَبَّرَ فَهُوَ أَحَبُّ إِلَيْنَا. But if he says the takbir, I prefer it. Or we prefer it. وَيَسْجُدُهَا مَنْ قَرَأَهَا فِي الْفَرِيضَةِ وَالنَّافِلَةِ. So if you are praying a fard prayer or praying a nafila prayer or any other form of prayer, and you recite it during that prayer, loudly or silently, you do the sajda. If you are behind an imam and he's done the sajda, even if you haven't heard it, you'll go with him, obviously, because you're praying behind the imam, you're following the imam. وَيَسْجُدُهَا مَنْ قَرَأَهَا بَعْدَ الصُّبْحِ. If you recite it after salat, there's two positions here, by the way. Now, there are times of the day where it is disliked for you to pray nafila prayers. After you have prayed Asr until Maghrib, and after you have prayed Subh until shortly after sunrise. Those times it's disliked to pray, and within those times, there are times where it is extra disliked to pray and forbidden to pray. So it's forbidden to pray while the sun is touching the horizon. While the disk of the sun is touching the horizon, at any moment while it's touching it, it's forbidden for you to pray. That's both at Maghrib and at sunrise. Both those times it's forbidden to pray. But the position with the sajda is slightly different, because these rakats we were talking about are, generally speaking, not quite at the same level of emphasis as the sajda through sahu is. I mean, the sajda of tilawa is. So it's more emphasized, a stronger sunnah. So for that reason, you pray it even after Asr. If you're reciting after Asr or after Subh, and you recite one of these ayats, you do the sajda. Except, he says, if the time of Isfar has started, and that's about 20 minutes or so before sunrise, when you can where the light is enough from the sun for you to make out people, recognize people. There's enough light. This is around 20 minutes or so before sunrise normally. Once that time starts, if you do this recitation after that, you don't do the sajda. And then also after Asr, there's a time which is called Isfirar, which is the yellowing of the sun, which is when you can look directly upon the sun. The sun is no longer bright, and it won't hurt your eyes to look at it. And this is, again, maybe half an hour or so before Maghrib, depending on the time of year. And again, if you recite after that point, before Maghrib, you also don't do the sajdas. So he says here, Man qara'aha ba'da subh ma lam yusfir. If you recite it after subh, so long as the time of isfar has not come, wa ba'd al-asr ma lam yusaffir ash-shams, so long as the sun has not yellowed after asr, then you recite it. Otherwise not. There's a question here. What would be the case if the imam suffers a nosebleed to the extent that he has to stop the prayer and go and clean himself? What do the people in the congregation do? What he does is what's called istikhlaf, which is he gestures for somebody else to come and take over the prayer for him. And then he goes, and if he comes back and they're still in the prayer, he'll join from behind. He won't rejoin as imam. Basically, like you do with istikhlaf, if you have to go and do wudu and then come back. It's the same situation. Babun fi salati safar, chapter or section dealing with the travel prayer. We'll go through this quite quickly, basically, inshallah. وَمَنْ سَافَرَ مَسَافَةَ أَرْبَعَةِ بُرُدٍ وَهِيَ 48 مَيْلًا فَعَلَيْهِ أَنْ يُقَصِّرَ الصَّلَاةِ. If somebody travels a distance which is more or at least the amount of 4 baridas, A barida was the distance that they used to have for post, where somebody would have a fresh horse. So somebody would be charging, riding their horse as hard as they could. And then there would be like a station where you could swap the horse, which is around what they called 4 farsakhs, which is 12 miles. So in order that somebody could deliver news much more quickly than somebody just ordinarily traveling, you would ride very hard. Then you would swap out your horse, ride very hard, or hand on the message to the next person to ride the next bit, and so on, to make sure that or if you're going to be the messenger who's delivering the news, you would make sure that you got on the next one, so you'd have fresh horses to go as quickly as possible.
12 miles. That'll be like how many minutes riding?
So no, that's 12 miles is one barida. 4 of them is 48 miles. So he says here, that is 48 miles, the Hashimi miles. And there's a difference of opinion about what Hashimi mile was. Some people said it was 2,000 cubits, dirats, which is this distance between the elbow and the top end of the fingers, which is approximately half a meter. And some people said it was 3,500 of those. It's two positions. On the one, the distance would be basically 48 kilometers. But that's not the strong position in the madhab. The strong position in the madhab is that it is the 3,500, which makes 84 kilometers. 84 kilometers, meaning around 51, 52 miles, something like that. So almost one of those miles will then be equivalent to one of our miles, slightly longer. Is that clear?
Yep.
The distance has to be from your starting point to your destination, not there and back. Say you're planning on going somewhere and then coming back the same day, you're thinking, well, I'm going to be traveling longer than that distance in my journey. That doesn't count. If the place you're going to is, say, 30 miles away, and then you're coming back 30 miles, that's 60 miles, you say, come on, yeah, I can shorten. No, unfortunately not.
That's just
So
reverse and not as the crow flies.
Yeah, basically not as the crow flies, but unless you're deliberately taking a route that
To make it longer.
to make it as long as possible. You think, oh my gosh, if I take that road, it's going to be 47 miles. Let's try and take that one. I'm sure it'll make it 52.
So it's one way.
Yeah, one way. Yeah, one way. فَعَلَيْهِ أَنْ يُقَصِّرَ الصَّلَاةِ. He has to shorten the prayer. By the way, he says he has to. It gives you an indication of the position in the madhab that it's a sunnah. Shortening the prayer is a rukhsa, it's a dispensation, something to make things easy for you, but they come in different types. The sunnah here is a very emphasized rukhsa, a dispensation that you should take. So much so that some of the people of the madhab said that if you pray your prayers in full when you are a traveler, you should repeat them as a traveler in order to. I've not seen many people do that, but I've heard mentioned as a position. So,
That's if you pray it alone.
or if you pray in a mosque then it's recommended. You'll see you can recommend it to pray it as 2, according to that position, because of the emphasis on shortening it. You're deliberately leaving a sunnah if you don't. But I've never seen anybody do that. But I mean, they mention that position to indicate how strong this is. فَيُصَلِّيهَا رَكْعَتَيْنِ. You pray each prayer as 2 rak'ats, except Maghrib. So obviously Subh stays as 2 rak'ats, you don't shorten it to 1. And all of the other 4 rak'at prayers become 2. But Maghrib, he says here, you don't shorten it. وَلَا يُقَصِّرْهَا.
Still.
It stays 3. وَلَا يُقَصِّرْ حَتَّى يُجَاوِزْ بُيُوتَ الْمِصْرِ وَتَصِيرَ خَلْفَهُ لَيْسَ بَيْنِ يَدَيْهِ وَلَا بِحِذَائِهِ مِنْهَا شَيْءٍ. You do not start shortening your prayer, he says, until you get outside the limits of your Misr, of your urban area. Yeah? And Misr is usually an area that has where the hudud are established and laws are given. So it could be quite it could be, even London would be considered a Misr, even though it was originally lots of different villages. The fact that they've joined together and they all identify as one block, and there is no separation between them by fields and things like that, you'd have to wait until you basically got outside of London. What people generally consider to be London, in order to start shortening. With Norwich, it's easier; it's a smaller place. If you lived in a town, it'll be even easier to know when exactly when to shorten. But you can't shorten until you get outside of that point. He says here it becomes behind you. There's none of it in front of you or parallel with you.
You can shorten before you've reached the minimum distance.
Yeah, of course, yeah. You shorten as soon as you make the intention of the journey. As soon as you go outside of that area, the city limits, then you can start to shorten. ثم لا يتم حتى يرجع إليها. Then you do not pray in full again until you come back to it. If you're going on a journey where you're constantly traveling to spend more than 4 days. So he says here, until you come back to it, or يقاربها بأقل من ميل, or you're less than a mile from it. So basically, you can't use the thing thinking, "Oh, right, I can see the city walls in front of me. It'll be easier if I quickly do my prayers now short before I get there." No, he says here, if you're basically there, less than a mile away, then on the way back, this is not on the way out. On the way out, only the limits. But on the way back, even if you're just close by, that's where we take into consideration. Unless you're going to a place other than your own place, in which case, when you there's certain places, by the way, you don't ever shorten when you go there. Your home, you might have a home somewhere, and you go and spend an hour there. You want to do your prayers and continue on your journey. If it's your home or your wife's home, you pray in full, even if you're going to only spend an hour there, or any other place that you regularly travel to and spend more than 4 days there. Basically, that sort of place, your norm is to spend more than 4 days there. So it's like a form of home. Those are the ones you don't shorten in those places.
Would you shorten if you intended to stay longer than 4 days or up
No,
to
no. He says here, وَإِنَّ وَالْمُسَافِرُ إِقَامَةَ أَرْبَعَةِ أَيَّامٍ بِمَوْضِعٍ. If you intend to spend 4 days in a place or more, أو ما يصلي فيه 20 صلاة, or to think of it another way, you intend to spend 20 prayers in that place. So you look at the prayers of time that you're in, you see how many there's going to be, and then if you plan to leave before you've reached the 20th one of those, then you're still traveling. If you are going to leave on the 20th or after the 20th, then you pray full. This is intention. You could actually spend a year somewhere, but you're expecting to leave the next day, but the orders never come. For example, say you're being posted somewhere and you're expecting the orders any day. You go somewhere waiting to be posted, and that the order is meant to come every day, but it doesn't come. But you're still within the expectation of it coming the next day, always. Then you might shorten the prayer for years in those circumstances, because your intention is never to spend more than 4 days where you are.
But after the point you've spent 4 days, you'd stop.
You still no, you wouldn't. It's by your intention here. You're still temporary in that place. You're not settling. When you spend 20 rakats in a place, basically you're putting down roots in a sense. But in this case, you're always on the point of leaving. You have no idea how long you're going to be there. It's not like you're intending to stop properly in that place. So he says here, if it's that, 4 or 20 rakats, atamma salatu hatta yad'an min makanihi dhalik. You continue to pray the prayer in full until you leave that place. So we'll finish there, inshallah. Are there any questions before we go to the next bit? Still a couple of things relating to travel, but it's slightly different.
The stronger opinion was 84 kilometers.
84 kilometers, yeah. Any questions online?
Yeah, I had a question about meat. It's barely related, but since you brought up butchering, I thought maybe I'd take the chance. You mentioned rotten meat being najis early in the lecture series. What is it? Halal rotten meat as well, like slaughtered rotten meat?
Rotten meat. What is halal rotten meat? You mean when they age a steak?
Well, when I open up my halal chicken and it smells terrible, and that's rotten.
Well, that's when it's reached that stage, then you wouldn't be eating it either. Otherwise, you're damaging your health. La darara wa la dirar.
If I get it on my clothes, though, do I have to treat it as najasa?
Well, I mean, not if it's a dry thing and doesn't transfer, but if the liquids of something that's rotten go into your clothes, then yeah, it's basically almost similar to when something goes into your stomach and then it becomes vomit. It's sort of changed.
Okay. Yeah, I thought it might just be roadkill. I wasn't sure if I understood it. So alhamdulillah, I understood. MashaAllah. Jazakallah
Well,
khair.
that's from what I've understood. But I mean, I'll check it again. But that's what I've understood from what my teachers told me.
Okay. Alhamdulillah.
All right. So we'll finish there, inshallah. Any questions? Any more questions? Okay, bismillah. Bismillah wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Ihdina as-siratal mustaqim. Siratal ladhina an'amta alayhim wa ghayril maghdubi alayhim waladdallin. Amin. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammadin abdika wa rasulika an-nabiyyi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam taslima. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati ma yasifun wa salamun ala mursalin. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Assalamu alaikum. Next week, I think Tuesday and Thursday.